episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. I think there's some comments that I haven't replied to as yet, so I will catch up with them as soon as possible. I thought last week's episode of the show was pretty good. Certainly got some social media likes from, well, certainly from Keebocken anyway. Nothing from Tomatin, although they're all the same. But anyway, I assume that they had no issues with the episode, and yeah. So we're moving on to this week's episode of the show, which, as you can see, is a bit of a different one. As you can see, we're looking at both beer and whiskey. And now, this was really cool. I mean, I don't often get the opportunity to do beer episodes of the show. I mean, I think I've only ever done one episode of the show before on beer, and certainly I've not done a sort of beer whiskey collaborative episode of the show. And it all kind of ties in quite nicely, as hopefully I will explain in a little while. And the reason for this week's episode of the show was I had a lovely email from Morgan at the distillery, the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery in Yorkshire, funnily enough, and he said, do you fancy doing an episode on our new batch 2 of our IPA finish? And I thought, well, does the Pope in the woods? And so I said, yeah, more than happy to. And so he outlined essentially the show, so and there are obviously numerous times when distilleries and other companies, independent bottlers and so on and so forth, will send me samples purely to just do a review for the show. I mean, like as I've often said, there often is a sort of a commercial angle, but sometimes I do get sent stuff just purely to review. And although obviously I do, deal with the distillery itself and stock their whiskies, with the company that employs me. And before we do go any further, obviously any comments I do make on today's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no relevance to the company that employs me. Not that am I going to say anything bad? No. And am I going to say anything critical? Well, that's possible. Love is not blind, as they say. Anyway. So the distillery itself, the history, I suppose, of the distillery kind of goes back further than the distillery, and this was, I suppose, the sort of what Morgan was kind of on about, wanting me to sort of, do a sort of not only focus on the juice, but also the history and how it all kind of ties in. So it all starts with the Mellor family, and the Mellor family have been farmers in and around Yorkshire since the mid-40s, and certainly have been owners of the Humanby Grange farm, I believe, since the 1980s at least anyway, which is when Tom and Jill Mellor took over the family business and the running of the farm, and had developed I don't know whether it was they that developed a reputation or whether they already had a reputation for high quality barley production, which was predominantly sold for malting. And you kind of get the feeling that there are some people, and I include myself in this, that are kind of quite happy with their lot, shall we say. You have a job you really enjoy and all that kind of stuff, and maybe, I wouldn't say you get sort of complacent, but it's kind of, you just enjoy it, but I get the feeling from the history of the distillery that Tom is not of that orientation, shall we say, and certainly they have done a number of different things over the years, including a bed and breakfast, apparently growing potatoes. I can imagine that's a bundle of laughs, bloody potatoes. They've also had chickens, huge amount of free-range chickens. I don't know whether they still do all of this or not. And in 2003 they thought, let's set up a brewery. Why not? So in 2003 they founded the Wold Brewery. Fast forward a few years to 2011, and Tom is having a pint, probably of his own beer, or maybe maybe one of the competitors' beers in the pub, one would imagine. It's funny, like I said, all of these kind of crazy plans seem to sort of, take place, from conversations in a pub, or if you're in Scandinavia, it's generally in a sauna, because the Scandinavians are a bit funny like that, aren't they? So apparently, so the story goes, 2011, he's having a pint with his mate, and they're kind of ruminating on what to do next. And so they're basically saying, well, we've got great barley, we make great beer, why don't we make whiskey? I mean, and when you think about it, sort of going back to sort of the 2010s and that kind of thing, that's when a lot of these sort of English distilleries were kind of, or a lot of the newer distilleries, not just English distilleries, were sort of becoming sort of got off the ground. There's sort of people thinking about them and that kind of thing. So 5 years later, one imagines, after sort of securing finance for said distillery, they indeed had a distillery, and it was certainly the stills, which we will get onto in a little while, were the sort of the brainchild of the late Dr. Jim Swan, who seemed to have his fingers in a number of different projects throughout, not just the UK, but obviously around the world. And I think he was certainly a pioneer in modern distillery building, shall we say. And so the whole point of, again, coming back to the whole point of the episode, is that there are very few distilleries. I mean, there are a few, I should say, very few older distilleries where everything is kind of self-contained. So basically, they have the farm. I mean, I know there are distilleries nowadays, like Locklear is another one, for example, Nicknean, that are basically sort of, they have the farm, they control their barley, they malt the barley, or they may well send it off to be malted, but then they obviously sort of distill, brew, whatever from it, and it's all very kind of sort of in-house, I suppose, symbiotic, I suppose, and keeps the carbon footprint low, which is what everybody's really into these days. And it's all very green and lovely, isn't it? But anyway, so moving on to the said stills, the really intriguing thing about the setup they have there is that they have obviously 2 pot stills, so they have sort of like the wash and the spirit still, but coming off the spirit still, they have a 4-plate rectifying column, which is quite intriguing. So it allows them to sort of play around a little bit with their spirit, and obviously create sort of different, certainly 2 different styles of spirit to play with. So basically the sort of starting point is the wash. So fairly long fermentation, I believe, well, relatively long, 75 to 95 hours. I mean, there are some distilleries that go well into the hundreds. So they're kind of setting out, again, like a lot of the modern distilleries, a lovely sort of fruity wash, a fruity base to distill from, and get obviously a lovely fruity style of spirit that's not going to require a huge amount of time in the cask before it can be bottled. But so basic, but what we have here, so we have a lovely kind of fruity whiskey. I mean, I've done episodes of the show on Filey Bay before, so I know what the character of the spirit is like. So for 6 months of the year they do double pot distillation, and that is set aside. Then for 6 months of the year, basically what happens is, as the spirit comes over the linarm, it's then diverted into the 4-column rectifier before going back through the condenser, and it produces obviously a slightly lighter spirit. So the stuff that's coming off the columns, the pot stills, is around about 72%. What comes off the column still is obviously slightly higher, comes off at around about 86, 85, then cut to 63.5% before it goes into cask. And the Flagship is a blend of these 2 distillates. The distillates are aged separately, so the pot still and the rectified spirit is aged separately before being blended together, and that's part of the wonderful thing about it. I mean, I've been trying to get hold of a sample of their pure rectified column spirit, but as yet that has not been forthcoming, and it's a possibility they may not actually ever release it, because it's a piece of the action, I suppose, you know, a piece of the recipe. I mean, I've obviously had samples of their sort of pot still new make, which is always lovely to do so, and if you find one of the earlier episodes, I forget which number it is, you'll see that the review that I did of the new make, and so that, you know, they've got these two different distillates to play with, and essentially the column still spirit has a lightness to it, obviously, but it kind of emphasises to a certain extent the fruity esters when blended together with the main pot still distilled spirit. So really looking forward. It's been a while, actually. It's been at least a couple of years since I last sort of tasted the Flagship, so I'm hoping that it's really good, and the quality is as high as it always has been. But coming back to again, what Morgan asked me to do was to basically highlight the new IPA cask finished bottling that they've done, or batch number 2 of it, and basically having essentially a brewery next door, it again continues the symbiosis. So what they do is the spirit comes off the stills into cask at 63.5%, and will eventually become the Flagship. Once that spirit has been degorged, they pop in the Scarborough Fair IPA. So the Scarborough Fair IPA is a 6% classic Indian pale ale, made from toasted barley and maize, and thrice hopped apparently. So that goes into cask, where it spends, I don't know exactly how long, but a period of time before they then take said beer out and bottle it as the Barrel Wave IPA. So the Barrel Wave IPA is actually increased to 9.1%. So obviously it's absorbed some of the whiskey that was already in said cask, and that has obviously increased the alcohol content of the Barrel Wave IPA. But now here's the interesting bit, because essentially they're pretty much next door. The same day that the Barrel Wave IPA is taken out of the cask, mature Flagship goes into the cask. And so 5 months later, after it's spent that length of time in the cask, it then comes out as the IPA finish. So like I said, it's just got this lovely symbiosis, and also the fact is that they haven't got to sort of disinfect the casks or anything like that. You know, it's literally sort of like whiskey out, beer in, beer out, whiskey in, literally, pretty much, you know. And so you really are sort of cutting down on any potential sort of, you know, bacterial contamination and all that kind of stuff, which I think is very, very cool. I mean, but again, this is not a sort of thing that's kind of wholly down to the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery, Henston, over in on the border of England and Wales, Shropshire. I was struggling to think where the hell they were there. Does sort of the same sort of thing, although they've not released their IPA or their beer finished whiskey as yet. I mean, because the still is essentially been set up in the brewery itself. It's just on a mezzanine floor. So literally, again, they have this kind of symbiotic relationship. But as I said, they haven't actually physically released a beer finished whiskey as yet, although I know it is on the cards to do so. But anyway, I think that's an awful lot of talking, probably more talking than I would normally tend to do on an episode of the show, but as I've only got 4 samples, it's kind of allowed me a little bit more sort of waffle time, as they say. But I think it's time to bring the waffle to an end, and well, I want to taste some whiskey and some beer, so let's take a look at the lineup for Down in the Valley. Right, okay, so as I pretty much told you what I'm tasting anyway, but I'm just kind of, you know, bear with me on this one. It's kind of, there are traditions on the show, so, you know, and one must follow the traditions. Well, one doesn't have to, but, you know, it's my show, and I'll follow my traditions. So we're going to kick off, obviously, with the Flagship, and like I said, about 5-year-old spirit, sort of bottled at 46%. Then we're going to move on to the Scarborough IPA, so 6% IPA. Then we'll obviously taste the Barrel Wave IPA at 9.1%, and then finally we shall do the IPA Finish. So again, we'll chart the journey, shall we say, from Flagship to IPA and the stages between them. And I think this is going to be really, really intriguing. I mean, I've not done this yet. I've not tasted them in this kind of order at all. So I'm really looking forward to this, and hopefully you will be as well. So let's kick off with a bit of Flagship. Okay, so let's start with the Flagship. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? As I expected, and I mean, this is the thing. I mean, it's been a couple of years since I last tasted it and nosed it, and it's pretty much identical. And that just shows you how consistent the distillery is. It's got that lovely estery apple, pineapple, apricot, a little bit of straw, a little bit vanilla, not a huge amount of oak. Oak is kind of got a nice creaminess, but it's kind of sitting back. We're getting lots and lots of beautiful, fleshy, fruity whiskey, and this is what floats my boat. Okay, I mean, I know there are people that like the more industrial styles, but I just find them hard work. I just want something that, you know, I stick my nose in and go, oh, it's not an over confected fruit bomb. I mean, I don't want that either. It's just beautifully balanced. There's a citric note that sort of just cuts through it. It gives it a freshness, a liveliness, almost a mineral note as well. It's just all really harmonious. It's just a lovely whiskey at the end of the day. Let's see what the parts like. Fresh, juicy. Oh my god, that finish is just to die for. So it kicks off with that lovely sort of fresh, juicy, almost bubblegummy white fruits, apricot, pineapple. Oak moves through on the mid palate, a little bit of creaminess. There is an almost kind of hoppiness to it, and a little sort of herbal spice, hoppy kind of juicy, apricot-y. Ooh, I mean, that's beautiful. The lingers. It's about 5 years old, and it is delightful. And I was doing a tasting evening last Wednesday in the shop for newbies, basically, or should we say newbies to the whiskey tasting evenings, anyway. And what I was trying to say to sort of, you know, people was that that what I want from a whiskey is all about balance, progression. I keep saying it. I probably, you know, say it so often it's untrue, but you know, that's what I look for, and that whiskey has it in absolute bucketfuls. I mean, it's just a beautiful whiskey at the end of the day. There's nothing hard about it. There's nothing sort of, you know, there's no edginess, there's no rawness, there's no roughness. It's just really juicy, really fruity, and just a really harmonious whiskey. So yeah.
We take control with fire and smoke, right into the Badlands.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Scarborough IPA. I better not to shake it too much because it's getting a bit of a head on it. Anyway, so let's see what the nose gives us. I mean, that just ties in beautifully. Again, it's a lovely, fresh, aromatic, very fruity IPA. Apricot, apple, nice fleshiness, almost a sort of, again, almost a banana-y kind of note. I love the hoppiness of it. It's not a hop monster. It's not in your face. There's a little bit of herbal hops. I mean, I'm not an expert in sort of hops. I know I can generally sort of tell American hops from English hops, and that's probably about it. But it's got a lovely roasted note coming through. There's, like I said, there's a bit of bitter hop. There's some floral hop notes, and underlying there's just lovely maltiness. Again, it's just got such a density to it, and the balance is absolutely stunning. Let's see what that's like. Full, fruity, juicy. I love the bitterness on the finish, which is just integrated. It's not overly bitter. It's just got that twang of bitterness to it. Again, apple, apricot, a little bit of pineapple. That fleshiness kind of comes through really nicely on the mid palate. The bitterness from the hops. There's a slight floral note again from the hops as well. And it's really juicy and it's fruity, and it just works very, very nicely. It's just a beautiful beer at the end of the day. Yeah, lovely.
We know the reason how this battle will fight.
Right, okay, so we've done the Flagship, and we've done kind of the raw material. So we've done the Flagship whiskey, which is obviously supplying the cask. Excuse me, bit of fizziness there. I'll come back. Right, okay, so we've done kind of like the raw material, so to speak. So we've done the Flagship, which is supplying the cask. We've done the Scarborough Fair IPA, so that now goes into those casks, and when it comes out, we have this. We have the Barrel Wave IPA. So let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Right, this is a more intense, this is a different animal entirely. It has that intense, late harvested honey kind of note. It's oxidised apple, bruised apple, oxidised apricot. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Tokai. It just has that, it just reminds me of Tokai, that oxidation, that honeyed oxidation. It's not sweet though. It's a combination of the alcohol and the citrus is kind of, it's just keeping the balance really, really nice. The oak is noticeable as not as overtly vanillaed, but you get the impression of oak, the supporting notes of oak, and this is just, you know, another classic example of getting the balance absolutely spot on. It's not a sort of an over oak monster. There's a little bit of a note from the spirit, but the thing is, it's kind of all kind of harmoniously sort of blended together. It's seamless. You know, it's not like you can sort of smell beer and spirit. It is just a seamless vatting blend, whatever you want to call it, of similar kind of characters, and it's all just beautifully emphasised. So pass on. Rich, deep, oxidised fruit again. Reminds me very much of Tokai. Again, there's a sort of a lovely citric note, just kind of like adding some balance. It's a little sweetish on the finish, but it's not sort of like overtly sweet. I mean, it is 9%. I get a sort of a whiskey-ish kind of element right on the aftertaste, which is quite nice. But again, it's all kind of very much melded in with each other. Really harmonious, beautiful balance. Just a lovely beer.
When the world comes crashing down.
Right, okay, and so finally, beer out, whiskey in, whiskey out, IPA finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Well, it displays the weight of the Barrel Wave IPA, so it's a lot more weightier than the Flagship. It's also less overtly fruity as well, and there's definite notes of the Barrel Wave IPA here. There's that sort of weighty, slightly oxidised fruit, but underneath that there's some lovely juicy apricot, some fresh apricot, fresh pineapple. possibly a touch more oak, a little bit more vanilla. Maybe that's the extra time, the extra sort of like 5 or 6 months that it's spent in the cask. It's just adding a little bit more vanilla notes. There's a little bit more. There is a light hoppiness. It's not an overt hoppiness, and that's because the Barrel Wave IPA doesn't have a huge hop character. It's more about the oxidative fruit, but there is a hop note there, obviously. But it hasn't kind of transcribed through like some IPA finishes that I've come across. Certainly the Jameson's IPA kind of springs to mind as being really overtly hoppy. You can almost like smell the hops. This is slightly different. This is not like that. This is more weightier, and like I said, this is showing more influence of the Barrel Wave IPA. See what that's like. So it kicks off with that weighty Barrel Wave oxidative apricot fruit character, a little bit of IPA hops as well, touch more creamy oak, but the spirit does come through nicely on the mid palate. Like I said, I'm getting the fresh apricots, I'm getting the fresher pineapple, but overall it feels a lot weightier, a lot more juicier. Nice progression, sort of nice malty, rich finish to it with a touch of straw, a little bit of spice. Yeah, really like that. I think that's very impressive. Right, okay, so let's on today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Morgan from the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery for the samples for today's episode of the show. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. So the Flagship is pretty much as I expected it. I have to say, I think the consistency of production and blending at the distillery is just absolutely top notch. And like I said, if you haven't tasted any of the Filey Bay whiskies, just start with the Flagship. Start at the beginning and just experiment with some of the other stuff that they have done. I like the Scarborough Fair IPA. Quite classically IPA at the end of the day. Maybe not quite as hoppy as some IPAs, but had a lovely weight to it, lovely fruitiness, and I thought was just absolutely delightful. The Barrel Wave IPA. So here we could start to see the effects of being aged in cask for 5 months. It had picked up an awful lot of oxidative character for 5 months. Well, I'm assuming it's about 5 months. But anyway, for however long it was in the barrel for, it picked up a lot of oxidation character. So that was a sort of the main character of this particular IPA. You could still tell it was an IPA. There was an element of hoppiness there, but it was kind of sat further back in the sort of the progression, shall we say, on the palate, and certainly within the nose. And again, it wasn't sort of like an oaked monster. It was all very, harmonious, balanced. The oak was sort of, playing again a lovely supportive role in the character of the flavours, and I just thought it was just absolutely superb. And the IPA finish, well, having tasted the Barrel Wave IPA, I could see the notes in the IPA finish, and again, not a sort of like a hugely hoppy sort of one-dimensional IPA finish. Again, it displayed the character of the Barrel Wave IPA just absolutely perfectly. And maybe this is what here we go, it's a bit of a marketing thing for you. If you buy a bottle of the IPA finish from the distillery, maybe they'll chuck you in a bottle of the Barrel Wave beer. They might do, then again they might not, but anyway, or at least maybe sell the two together so you could actually sort of experience the two, because I think that's absolutely fascinating that you can sort of like pick up the character of that IPA absolutely spot on. And it's, by the end of the day, even if you don't do that, just buy the whiskey. The whiskey is absolutely gorgeous. So anyway, there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been, thoroughly entertaining, and I wouldn't quite go as far as saying eye-opening, but I think it's been sort of quite a revelation. So really, very, very much appreciated the sample. So anyway, guess nothing else much to say apart from buy a bottle of Filey Bay. Good dramming and good afternoon.
Motherfucking battle rages on. Take a seat for this one-way ride. I'm ready. Fuck it. We take it all. We fire and smoke.